years ago, there used to be a grapefruit diet. Yeah, and I've been on it too, you believe it or not, years ago, because when I was in the Army, they want everybody in the Army to be 6 foot tall and 150 pounds. I never met that. And you were required to, but you're required to weigh in twice a year. You're required to take a fitness test. I never had a problem with fitness tests, as you can imagine. I usually do it out of order. But the weight I struggle with, honestly. Because the more muscle, the bigger you are, the harder time you're going to have with it. And I just struggle with that push. So occasionally, I would find myself trying to lose a couple pounds before the big day came. And if they would if you failed to weigh in, they would do the tape test, wrap the tape around your neck. I always passed it that way, but I just didn't want to go through that. But anyway, so there's a growing body of research right now that confirms the benefits of eating more plant-based meals. I'm not talking about being vegetarian per se, or vegan or any of that stuff. Just the point of the article was to get more vegetables, or to make sure you're eating enough vegetables, and the right vegetables, because there can be a difference. But the growing body of research says that we need to be eating as Americans more plant-based meals. While many people assume that plant-based refers to eating no animal products, that's not what this means. It just means obviously eating more vegetables than you would meat. Or make sure you're getting enough vegetables, bottom line, like I said a moment ago. And we're talking about whole grains, legumes, beans, fruits, and those kind of things. So I mentioned beans. I'm going to start with beans first. They help. The good thing about it is they help curb your appetite or your intake a lot of times because they fill you up. They give you that feeling of satiety. And I've talked about we talked a lot about beans in here. Black beans, and it really didn't specifically say black beans in here, but one good thing about a lot of beans, and the black beans in this case, is they're very high in protein, lots of proteins. And you can get a lot of protein from your beans. As a matter of fact, they say that vegetarians should eat as many of the dark vegetables as possible, like I'm trying to think of one. Collard is what I was thinking about. I'm trying to think of it at the time. But the dark leafy green vegetables are the ones that have the most protein. So they say vegetarians again should focus, if you're totally vegetarian, you should focus on those dark green vegetables. But sticking with beans in this case, a new study published in the Food and Nutrition Research found that people who ate a meal in which beans were the source of protein consumed 12% fewer calories at their next meal.
Wow.
Yeah, it kind of gave you that feeling of fullness to that extent. And then moving into cabbage, or over cabbage. Cabbage is 92% water. Didn't realize that. And we talked a couple weeks ago about a lot of the fruits and vegetables that are high in water because that'll help hydrate you if you're eating those vegetables. Well, obviously cabbage would be one of those vegetables that you could get a lot of water from and it would hydrate you. In addition to the water or fluids that you're drinking. So the cabbage is obviously a great one. And I said it was 92% water. So it fills you up with water and fiber and virtually no calories, only 17 calories per cup. So that within itself is pretty good. There's lots of different ways, to to add it to your diet, to stir fry it, put it in salads. I haven't really thought about how to try that. I guess some people have. Use it as a wrap instead of traditional bread. There's an idea. And then steamed, obviously. And then bell peppers. I love bell peppers. They're fiber packed, and they obviously help fill you up too. I didn't really realize that. That's what this study says. So they give you that same feeling of satiety. A bell pepper, one medium bell pepper has only 24 calories and can help limit your intake, as I said, of other high-calorie foods and overeating. And if you get enough fiber, research shows that you will actually will absorb as much as 90 fewer calories a day. That's huge. That's big. Yeah. And then it's rich in vitamin C and those kind of things. And obviously we eat those as salads and add them omelets and different things. We talked about sweet potatoes a few weeks ago. I think it was sweet potato cauliflower recipe, I think it was. I love sweet potatoes, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago. But they're high in fiber and very dense. And they also make you feel like you're full. one 5-ounce sweet potato with skin is only 100 calories. You can make a meal out of that sweet potato. I've done it. I've seen other people do it. Of the sweet potatoes does have less starch than a regular potato. That much I know, but I have to do a little more research. But I gotta say, if it's only 100 calories, probably okay. Certainly versus white potatoes. I would do a little more research on that before I said, let me see what I can find out before I get back to you. Of all the stuff that I've looked at for sweet potatoes, I've never seen anything that counteracted diabetes or said it was bad. So that would be a new one, I'm not sure. And put some cinnamon on it. That is a great, we talked about that last week. Sure, exactly. And sweet potatoes are rich in vitamin C, and they have a lot of antioxidants, which are important. And then lemons. I don't like anything real sour, so lemon is not something I don't even put in my tea. Now, if I go to a restaurant, the tea's got lemon in it, I hand it right over to her. Pick it right off my glass and stick it right on hers. I don't like anything sour. Is that not true?
Yes, my love.
Okay. Need the sound effects. Okay. The thing about, you've heard of lemon being used to flavor food like fish, to add flavor. But a lot of people believe it with just fish, but you can add that. This article said, add that, recommend adding it to other things other than just fish to use for flavoring. You see that, one example would be on rice, creamy sauces, or any other dish that you really like. Try adding a little bit of lemon juice to it. Yeah, there you go, that too. And then obviously the vitamin C that you get from lemons is a plus. And then a while back, probably more than a month, I talked about hydrating with fruits and like taking the fruit, cutting it, putting it in a mason jar or glass jar, put water in it, letting it sit in the fridge for a couple hours, and mashing the juice out of it, whatever, flavoring the water with lemon would be one of those things that you want to do in that regard. Okay. Yeah, almost eliminated. All right, any questions about that or any comments? Sweet potato.
Well, they have a Walmart freezer now, and I bought them because it filled me up. It tastes good, but I don't saw it has it, but I never read it.
Yeah, I would check this. So
But they do have it in the freezer at Walmart.
But it was what? Cauliflower?
Mashed cauliflower and mashed sweet.
Oh wow, there you go.
Yeah, they're in the freezer. There you go. I ate one of them. It filled me up.
How about it? It's working.
Together?
No, they're separate.
Oh, okay.
But it's not why you couldn't mix them, bomb them,
Well,
and
you
put them
could
together
want it, yeah.
and make that recipe that we talked about. It's already made for you. Hey, all right, that's good stuff. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, Lynn, for sharing that. That's good stuff. Hey, that's good stuff to you.
He's going to lose weight, though. He said,
Oh, you're not? Oh, you're not.
I bought myself a pressure cooker. I make beans every week and eat them all week long. I eat cabbage and what's that sausage? I fry that.
Like kielbasa?
Yeah, kielbasa. I eat that. Beans, the 16 bean soup, 16 beans. Anyway.
Look at the kielbasa, and that could be part of the issue. Look at the kielbasa. Let's find out what percent of fat is, and just that could be part of the problem. And that's good too, because we're going to do a little thing on apple cider vinegar and benefit to that here soon too.
That's my first thing every morning after lemon.
Oh wow. Okay.
You sound exactly like me. Everything you've said just about I do except for the kielbasa. And one of the problems, if you're talking about you're not losing weight, remember that no matter what diet is out there, no matter what it is, South Beach, Nutrisystem, Weight Watchers, the most important factor in it will always be decided by calorie intake. Always. Even exercise is second to caloric intake. And beans, because I eat the same way. I'll open up a can of beans and that's my meal. But it's always caloric intake. Always.
This is called the low diet.
Yeah,
it's still a good diet. It's still a good diet. All right. We're going to move into our devotion. We're going to move into our devotion this morning. And it comes from the book of Mark. Mark starting in verse 35 through 41, I think it is. Yeah. And Mark 4:35 through 41 is the story where Jesus calmed the storm. And so I want to start out this morning by asking a question. Has anybody ever been in a storm? Yeah. Okay. And I'm talking about all kinds of storms. I'm talking the physical one and then the storms of life. I'm talking about all storms in general. Okay. And to be honest with you, here shortly we'll be talking less about the storm Matthew and Hermine or whatever they are, and more about the storms of life. But we've all been through some sort of storm in our life, everybody. And so that's what today's story is about. I'm going to read those verses again. Mark 4, starting with 35, verse 35. And the same day when the evening was come, he said unto them, Let us pass over the other side. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship, and there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, and so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow, and they awoke him, and they said unto him, Master, carest that thou not that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Okay, so obviously this is talking about a particular storm that Jesus was in. So let me just give you a synopsis of what we just read. Jesus and his disciples were out ministering, doing what they did. Preaching, teaching, healing, all the things that we read about in the New Testament. Curing leprosy, opening blinded eyes, all of these things that Jesus was doing. They had just finished one of those events, if you will, and the crowd broke up. They went on their way, and Jesus and his disciples had to make their way to the other side of Lake Galilee, which is kind of like, it's about 8 miles across. That gives you an idea how big it is. And it's got big mountains on each side. Lake Galilee is at 700 feet below sea level. And then I think the peak of the mountains, it said, was like 3,000 feet. So it kind of gives you an idea geographically of the area. So anyway, Jesus says that we go to the other side. They get in the boat. Other little boats, because people can never get enough of Jesus, they're in tow. They're moving across Lake Galilee. And a storm just comes up out of nowhere. And from what I read and studied, that is just the way it happens there. And I'll get back to that in just a moment. But anyway, great storm. I mean, I don't think it was just like the other day we had all this wind gust at 40. The way I read it, this was a like hurricane force type storm. The rain, the lightning, the high winds moved in. And the boat started taking in water. Jesus was asleep because he was so tired. He was in the boat asleep. The storm got so bad that the boat was full of water. They were afraid they were going to capsize or drown. They woke Jesus up. And of course, Master, how can you sleep? Do you not care about us? How can you let us perish? And he says, basically, ye of little faith. Then how could you be worried? Why could you be so in fear? So that's kind of what happened, just to give you the gist of it. So I just, I asked you about the storms of life, and or had you ever been in a storm? And I was really more or less talking about the storms of life. This event or this situation really represents our life here on earth and the storms that will come. And I heard a pastor one time say, on the sea of life, we are either in one of three places. We're either headed into a storm, we're in the storm, or we're just coming out of the storm. And you think about that. After I heard that, I've heard that a couple of different times when this sermon was preached. But you think about it, and you don't know when the storms are coming. You have no idea, just like this one, when the storm will blow in. We have no idea when financially we're going to have an issue, or someone that we love or care or close to passes away, or whatever. We have no idea when the storms are coming. So you think about it, either you're headed into a storm, you're in a storm, or you're just coming out of a storm, and that's kind of the ebb and flow of life. That's just the way it works. And I thought that was so appropriate. If you let that really sink in and think about your life and other people's lives, that really makes sense. And so I'm going to pick it back up here with verse 35, with those thoughts in mind. The key thing in there, in that verse, is Jesus says, let us pass over to the other side. And it kind of has three meanings. The other side, in this case, physically meant getting across to the other side of Lake Galilee. And again, I said that was 8 miles across. The other side also represents the other side of the storm, when you're coming out of that storm I just spoke to. But more importantly, the other side, it refers to the other side of this life, which for me that is heaven. And I hope that's the other side of this life for you is heaven, and for everyone. But that's what in the big realm of things, the big picture, that's the other side. The other side of this life, the other side of humanity is, obviously you're going to be in one or two places, and the other side for me is heaven, and I want the same thing for you. So you kind of get three ideas of the other side, if you will. In verse 36, it says that, and when they had sent away the multitude, that doesn't mean that they run the multitude off. That just meant that they were concluded, and it was time to move on to continue the same thing, to preach, teach, and to heal, which is what Jesus did. And so Jesus tried to touch everybody he could, and there was no doubt about that while he was here. But in this particular case, they were finished on one side of Lake Galilee, and it was time to move over to the other side. And in the same verse 36, it says, they took him even as he was into the ship. This meant that Jesus, because remember, Jesus came from heaven. He was here in the form of a man, but he was God. He was in the form of man. But he got tired. The physical part of him, just like us, was tired and exhausted completely. Jesus didn't take a day off. He was physically tired and worn out. They helped him into the ship. He fell asleep. And as they continued to cross over to the other side. Verse 37, this verse tells us that every person will encounter those storms of life. It says, and there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And again, the storm was so fierce that the boat, again, was full. A great storm that came up without warning. Again, they had no warning. And it said the way the geography was, obviously Lake Galilee is 700 below sea level. And then you got the 3,000 foot peaks. You also got rivers and streams that come in that feed into it. And they're deep cut into the earth, so they're like ravines. And so the wind, it comes in like a siphon. It gets sucked into the area. And this front came in, and boom, it came in just like that. All of a sudden. And, the thing is, whether we're a Christian or whether we're not, I mentioned a minute ago, the storms of life will come. And I think there's a misconception out there a lot of times that if you're a Christian and you're saying that you won't have storms, you won't have, life will not touch you, and it will. And this is proof that it will. The disciples couldn't get any closer to Jesus than they were at the time, and yet there was a storm. So storms are going to come our way. I don't care who we are; they're coming our way. But I've learned a couple of things. It's not about the storm, but it's who you're in a storm with. You let that soak in for a minute. It's not about the storm; it's who you're in a storm with. I'm not going to get it. You've heard me tell my personal testimony last year sometime. I'm not going to get too deep into that. But a couple things relating to that is I got saved in 1994 after being raised in the church. When I turned 18, joined the Army, I said I didn't want anything to do with that. I lived my way for a long time, and then I got saved in 94. After my father passed away, he was burned in an industrial accident, burned to death. About a month later, I was in church revival service, and I got saved. But then in 2003, I was preparing to go to Iraq. My wife decided to leave at the same time, so I got all this going on in my life at the same time.
Not this wife.
No, the other one. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm sorry.
Good job.
Yeah. Anyway, that storm, that was a storm, huge storm. Those are two biggest storms in my life. And what I want to say about that is, one storm brought me to God, and the other one's made me stronger in God. Jesus. So the two biggest storms in my life involve God, and one brought me to Him again, and the other one made me more in tune to Him. Got me more involved with Him, got me more in love with Him, and all those kind of things. So anyway, the storms have value, and we don't see that when we're in it, but storms have value, and that's what two of my biggest storms meant to me. That's what they did for me. And to be honest with you, I'm now thankful for them. I'm now thankful for them. That God used them and that I'm on this side of it, and things turned out the way they did. But let me look at verse 38, and it said basically the disciples were fearing for their lives. That's when the boat got full of water. Let me point out something about that. Is Jesus was not afraid. The disciples were scared to death and they were fearing for their lives, but He was not. And then it said that, I had already stated in verse 35 when this thing starts out, it says, "Let us pass over to the other side." When Jesus says it, it's going to happen. And notice what He didn't say. He didn't say, "Let's try to get to the other side," or "Let's try to outrun this storm," or "Let's hope we make it to the other side." He said, "Let's make it to the other side." You can write it down, mark it down, it's going to happen. But He knew that, but the disciples weren't yet fully convinced. Of course, they didn't know the storm was coming, so you can't take a whole lot away from them. They didn't realize the storm was coming. And to that magnitude. So, the indication here is that the disciples let Jesus sleep. And it's kind of the other point I want to make is, the boat got full of water, but they didn't wake Him up until it was like ready to capsize and they were about to go under. And so, if you don't have it, in this case, they had faith, but they didn't have enough. They didn't have the right kind of faith at the right time. So we do that as humans. It's kind of the humanistic part of us, is that we want to handle things on our own, or we don't think we need maybe Jesus at the time. We're going through something. We want just, I got this. The disciples clearly didn't have it. Now we're going to see that just like my storms, I became better for it, and they're going to become better for it. We'll see that here. At the time, they were. You picture this in your mind: boat's full of water, Jesus is asleep. Waves are washing over all of them. He's still asleep, and they're in their bound water. And what happens when you get in the ship and there ain't nothing? I mean, if you got a bilge pump, you hit the bilge pump. And if you got buckets, you grab buckets. And if you don't have anything, you just. And that's where they were. And they forgot something. Jesus was right over there. They forgot that. So anyway, again, we have a picture of humanity. When we call on Him, if we know Him, we can call Him anytime we want, whether the boat's full of water or not. And that's, to me, that's key. That's something I always try to keep in the back of my mind, always. No matter what the storm is, Jesus is in my boat. And then they asked in verse 38, it says, and then they ask Him, and they wake Him and say unto Him, "Master, carest Thou not that we perish?" And that, if you're in a disciple's position, maybe that seems like a natural question to ask, maybe. But just remember, now, one of the things that I studied said, Jesus may have had His eyes closed, but His heart was open. And I like the way He said that. Is Jesus, He knows He's Jesus, He's God. He knows everything about us. He knows everything there is to know. So He was not asleep at the wheel, if you will. He was not. He knows. And this is what Jesus can do for us. Because when He stood up and He said, I got to kind of wrap this up, I already got. I'm good at getting signals, and I got 1 minute for it, whatever it is. But anyway, Jesus stood up and said, "Peace be still." And he calmed the storm, and it was instant. The wind stopped, the waves stopped. It was the perfect calm, if you will. And Jesus calmed my storms, I can tell you. And He can calm your storms. And of course, right after that, Jesus says, and how is it that you have no faith? And that was much like saying, very much like saying, do you think any harm would have come to you with me in the boat? And it wasn't that the disciples didn't have, again, as I said, it wasn't that they didn't have any faith. They followed Jesus. They had faith. They had some faith because they put their whole lives into following Him and trying to be like Him and trying to learn all that He could teach them. So they had some faith. They didn't have enough for this particular situation. And that's where, when I said earlier, that's where storms develop faith. And I can tell you, after I went through a separation, and a couple of months later found myself in Iraq, and I was early in Iraq. I was within the first year, so things were blowing up all over the place. And I was in charge of a lot of men, and so I was responsible for their safety and their security. The Lord used all of that. The Lord used all of that to bring me here today, and I'm convinced of that. And to make me who I am and what I am today. It seemed like I was sinking at the time, but the Lord had it the whole time. Anyway, this fear was not a slave-like fear. I want you to understand that, but it's a recognition, on their part, it was a recognition for the first time that He's exactly who He'd been telling them He was. It's a reverential awe, like respect. And again, it's not that slave-like, I'm going to beat you type fear. It's that reverential awe and respect is what it's referred to. So let me wrap this up. The disciples got a lesson in faith from the Creator and the Master Himself. And the wind and the sea obey Him, so why should we fear the storm? I mean, I know storms are coming. I don't know when the next one's coming. It's coming. I know it's coming. But I know one thing. You know, I got the one that can stand up and say, wind stop, wave stop, and stop now, kind of thing. I know the one that can calm the storm. So I don't worry about storms, because He's got it. He's in the boat. So I hope He's in your boat. He can be in your boat if He's not. And we talk about it a lot. That's just us saying, you know, that's accepting Christ as your Lord and Savior and living in that manner, and He will be in your boat. All right. Any questions or anything before we move on? Anything else? I encourage you, if not, to pull the Bible out this week and